You ever wonder why you rarely ever read about users of Paasche Model H's having trouble painting? That's because those modelers are actually having fun building, rather than fighting with their tiny 0.2mm Illustrator's airbrush. The Paasche Model H has been around for a long time. In fact, I don't think anyone really knows when it made its first appearance. A lot of modelers claim it's a workhorse, although some say it's a plow horse, but maybe it's just a dead horse. You can't argue with the fact that it's reliable. I can certainly attest to that. I used one for years. In fact, my first airbrush was its baby brother, the Model F. Here's my first airbrush. Notice how in those days it was actually a small version of the H, and you even got a velvet-lined case to boot. The Paasche Model H is basically a refinement of the very first airbrush patented by F.E. Stanley in 1876. We now refer to this device as an atomizer. The old Paasche H's were built like tanks, and the head couldn't be more basic. Easy to clean, just loosen the Allen screw and unscrew the nozzle. Three large parts that you couldn't lose if you tried. But for all their rugged reliability, are they the best tool for the job? In terms of surface finish, not at all. Here you can see a comparison of the atomization from the Paasche Model H on the bottom and an internal mix airbrush on the top. The combination of increased air pressure necessary to siphon the paint, as well as mixing it with air so far out into the airstream, makes it impossible for the Paasche H to equal the atomization of a gravity-feed so-called internal mix airbrush. So-called because all airbrushes combine the air and paint outside the body of the airbrush. But in the case of the double-action airbrush, the paint's introduced at the exit point of the air, while the Paasche H hangs the paint nozzle way out into the airstream, so it's a bit like blowing paint off a toothpick. Furthermore, because the H is a single-action airbrush, the minute you start the air, you get paint and maybe splatter. So for more intricate freehand camouflage, you're going to have better luck with a double-action airbrush where you start the airflow and roll in the material flow. So despite these disadvantages, why do Paasche H owners cling so tightly to their primitive airbrush? Well, let's take a look at this scenario. Longtime Model H user Fred decides he's going to get with the program and buy himself one of those shiny new airbrushes that everyone's always raving about. His knowledge of double-action internal mix airbrushes is limited, so he winds up taking the wrong advice. He buys an airbrush that's way too small for the job, an airbrush designed for inks and transparent colors. The new airbrush becomes a struggle, and after a while he finally gives up and reverts to his trusty old friend, in the firm belief that all those fancy newfangled airbrushes are more trouble than they're worth. So what happened? Well, Fred's Paasche H is basically a fire hose. Take a look at these two nozzles. The one on the left is a number 3 for a Paasche H. Now nobody knows what the number 3 means, only that it's larger than the number 1 and smaller than the number 5. The one on the right's a 2mm nozzle from his snappy new Harder Steenbeck. Now let's take a look at the 2mm nozzle compared to a 5mm nozzle from an Iwata Eclipse, and the Eclipse nozzle with the Paasche H. And finally, to seal the deal, compare the Paasche H nozzle to the "oh, you can't use one of those, they're for painting real cars," my favorite, the Iwata LPH80 with a 0.8mm nozzle. So is it any wonder why Fred had trouble getting paint out of his new airbrush? Double action doesn't have to mean double trouble, and you don't have to settle for a grainy finish to have ease of operation. Had Fred focused on selecting an air painting tool that offered him better control and surface finish, while still maintaining the ease of material handling that he was used to, chances are he would have been more than satisfied, spending more time building and having more fun. So long for now, and I'll see you next time.